Right, history class is in session, but I think you're going to enjoy this. We are standing in the old Ford engineering laboratory in Dearborn, Detroit. This is the last remaining building still standing where Henry Ford himself had an office, and it is now home to basically the whole entire history of the Ford Motor Company. And what they've got in here and through there is mind-blowing. So I thought I'd show you around. And we'll start in a really obvious place. You're thinking, ugh, a Model T Ford painted black. It's 100 years old or something, it's an antique, move on. Not so. This was built in 2003. This is a Ford Model T 100. It was a continuation car built to celebrate the centenary of the Tin Lizzie, but it was built using all the same production methods that the originals were made. So it is basically a brand new 1927 model year Model T Ford. Looks rather sweet, doesn't it? And then behind me, what you can see here on this photograph on the wall is 1 day's production from the Dearborn factory. I mean, get your head around the scale of that. When you hear about how the Model T and its production line just revolutionized the way that cars and all goods were mass produced, that gives you some idea of just what a phenomenal success this thing was. By the time the Model T went out of production, half of the cars on planet Earth were those. Now this is cool. Early example of a viral marketing campaign aimed at young people perhaps? The 1965 Ford Model Car Racing Championship. Basically, if you've heard of scale-electric or slot car racing, it was that. Ford was going to sell miniature cars for people to race at local clubs. But the clever bit, as you can see here in the intra-company communications, was that to sign up for it, the program was designed to build dealer traffic through the requirement that entry forms be acquired at local dealerships. You had to go to where they sold real Fords to sign up to drive the little ones. And I love this as well. Due to the unusual nature of the sport, all ages of men and women would participate. There we go, motorsport's come a long way, hasn't it? Now speaking of motorsport, follow me over here for something absolutely jaw-dropping. Okay, so what is Ford's finest hour? You know, UK hot hatches, the Model T. I think a lot of people would say it's the GT40 and Le Mans. After all, it was made into a movie with Christian Bale and Matt Damon, a movie that the people here at the Ford archive don't really like because it's not very accurate. However, on this table, we have the entire history of the GT40, and I really mean it from Genesis. For example, this. This is a newswire, okay, before Twitter was a thing. The following has just been released in Detroit by PR Newswire. Ford Motor Company and Ferrari wish to indicate, with reference to recent reports of their negotiations towards a possible collaboration, that such negotiations have been suspended. This is it. This is the smoking gun. This is the moment on the 22nd of May 1963 that Ford and Ferrari, well, their relationship fell apart. Ford was incensed and they decided that they would go to Le Mans, Ferrari's crown jewel of racing, and destroy them. That began right here.
Ford's also preserved the original confidential design blueprints of the GT40 and kept humble things like a press release sent out to newspapers ahead of Le Mans to explain what the race was to Americans who hadn't heard of it, where it took place, and who was driving their American-backed cars.
And then of course we all know that in the end it was a happy ending for Ford. They beat Ferrari in '66 and that started 4 years of domination at Le Savre. But it didn't come cheap. This document here is the Special Vehicles Activity Budget Overrun for Indy 500, for Le Mans. So we here have the higher costs of accelerated development of the Mark II Ford GT with the 427 engine. That was a $100,000 overspend. And there's overspend all the way along here, and the total overrun for 1965, $475,000 over budget. But hey, making history doesn't come cheap. And also, there was plenty of pressure on Ford from the boss. Henry Ford II handed out these cards to his employees. You see that? that says, "You better win." And just to round off that happy ending of the GT40 story, let me show you this. This is fantastic. What we have here is a bar tab from the Le Chanclair restaurant on East 49th Street, New York City. It's from June the 23rd, 1966. This is the 24 Hours of Le Mans victory dinner for Ford. And here's what they spent. 25 bottles of this champagne, 17 bottles of Bollinger, 453 individual drinks, and one cake at $40. The total bar tab, $2,800.03. Someone in the comments can hopefully figure out with inflation what that is in today's money. But yeah, I bet that was a pretty incredible party. Right, that's safely back in its holder. Come here, interesting photograph I've got to show you. There's the old man, Henry Ford Sr. with Edsel, and Ford's first V8 engine. Imagine how many millions of those they've churned out since. Interesting photograph, but if you want interesting artifacts, look what's through this door. Right, what you've seen so far is the kind of dressed up museum-y side of the archive, whereas what we've just walked into is kind of the storeroom, and things get really quite silly in here. Starting with this. Look, a full-size polystyrene design buck for the Ford GT back in 2015 when it was being designed in a secret room in the Ford headquarters with only about 12 guys who even knew what was going on in there, and they weren't allowed to tell their wives what they were doing at work. I mean, it's very obviously a Ford GT, but check it out. They hadn't finalised the shape of the radiators, they didn't know what shape the headlights were going to be, they actually changed the shape of this front bumper. Just shows how much had to change. There were 3 of these full-size design models, 2 were destroyed, this is the only survivor. It is probably a priceless piece of polystyrene. Speaking of stuff that is incredibly valuable, take a look at this. That is Henry Ford's resignation letter, dated September 20th, 1945. I hereby resign the office of president of this company. Yours very truly, Henry Ford. And there's the envelope that it came in, and here next to it, almost as interesting, July 13th, 1978, this is Lee Iacocca's resignation letter. Mr. Mustang, the guy who was not just in charge of the Mustang, but also the Lincoln Continental, a massive figure in Ford history. And in '78, he left Ford behind to become president of Chrysler. Ooh, that was awkward. There's the letter that started that whole thing off. Then, just been talking to one of the archivists about the fact that it wasn't until the 50s that Ford ever did financial audits. So there's Ford's first financial audit, and here is the first Ford share from when the company went public. You've got all these financial documents and the notice of its listing on the New York Stock Exchange, March the 7th, 1956. I wonder if you'd bought a few of those then, what would they be worth now? Now, of course, you should never go rifling through someone's drawers without asking. In here, just little pieces of human Ford history. You've got all of the Ford Rouge plant security guards badges. There's a Model T badge from 1950, 1920, 1930s. You've got someone's bus pass that they were using to get to work. Here you've got an access card to get into the Ford Rouge plant from January the 17th, 1938. Someone folded that up and put that in their pocket and forgot about it. And here it is 90 odd years later. What's in here? Oh yes, the complete collection of Ford lapel pins. And what's in here? Ah, yes, badges, because as everyone knows, a Ford is no Lincoln. Nice. There's even, what's this? A badge celebrating Ford's millionth car by 1935. Lots of stuff in there. I mean, this is just one set of drawers in one corner of the room. You're starting to get an idea of the scale of this place. Let's pick another one. Oh yeah, there's all sorts of stuff going on in here, more visitor badges, more actual car badges. Badge from the Pinto that's not charred, because I guess that one hadn't exploded. This is kind of interesting actually. Look at your Ford cufflinks and Ford pocket watches. Having loads of merch, basically, having a revenue stream through your gift shop, that is not a new innovation. Companies have been doing it very, very long time. Even selling you a fleet of postcards. Now this is interesting, because in here, there is some top Ghia. Ghia, you see, was a Italian design house, much like Pininfarina or Bertoni. I think it was bought out by Ford in the 70s. And when they did, well, they got the whole Ghia archive, and it's all in here. You see, Ghia, they didn't just do Ford designs back in the day, they did it for all sorts. And just in here, under the piece of paper marked Ferrari, there are sketches, beautiful sketches of the Ferrari 410 Super America, this outrageous looking car from, I think it was the mid-50s, with the sort of American inspired fins on the back, this gurning grille on the front, and they're all just lying in this drawer here. Oh, I better make sure I put it back in the right order. Hang on. There we go. That one goes in there, and then there's a side profile view underneath. Can you see that? Isn't that beautiful? And again, all that's just in one drawer, in one chest of drawers, in one massive room. It feels like that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, at the end where they're just pushing the crate into the warehouse. I mean, where do you start next? Now, if you can hear a sort of low humming noise in the background, that would be the refrigerators. And they're not keeping the food in here, no. Glad I've got my Top Gear gilet on, because what's in here is really quite special. Right, it's 40 degrees Fahrenheit in here, which I think is around 5 degrees Celsius, as you can see by my goosebumps. But that is because what we have in here is the entire Ford film archive. And because this is all organic film, it degrades over time. Bacteria can get at it. So if you can keep it at a cool temperature, it stops the kind of the inks and things cracking, and it keeps the film alive for longer. I mean, just the sheer amount in here is phenomenal. I asked the archivist just now, well, why don't you just digitize all of this? Why don't you just put it all on a memory stick? Problem is, they said, that format will age faster than film does. In the mid-2000s, Ford decided they would put all of this onto CDs, but they used Kodak CDs. Kodak went bust, and then modern CD readers, and there aren't many of those, stopped being able to read the Kodak format. So they almost lost all this stuff. They had to spend a fortune recovering it back onto film. So maybe technology will soon bring us a way of saving all this for future generations, but for now the best thing to do is keep it here and keep it cold. Cool. Brings a whole new meaning to Netflix and chill. Right, a car. Who from the class can tell me what this is? Yes, it's the Bronco. So why is it made out of polystyrene? This is from when they were figuring out which parts of the new Bronco should be removable. So how were they going to figure out how the roof came on and off, and where should the doors be mounted? Because Ford wanted you to be able to remove them when you were off-roading. There's even stuff like polystyrene annotated steering wheel when they were figuring out the design for that. And I love the hand-drawn vents and engine start button, because they were figuring out where things should go on the dashboard. Now then, probably an important piece of history, this. The first electric F-150 test mule. You can see bits of the battery hanging down underneath. You can see there's quite a big clue on the load bed there, all electric prototype. This is what became the F-150 Lightning. But if you like electric Fords, follow me down here. Yes, for serious playtime, you want your electric remote control Fords. This is basically the toy department, and they have got just about everything. remote control cars, about 1 million die-cast models. They've got, wow, designer timepieces. That's a lovely item there. What was that I just spotted? Oh my goodness. God, that's heavy. Let me try and show you this. This is one of those like super posh scale model hypercars for millionaires, I think. Look at that, that's a beautiful Ford GT, but I'm gonna drop that and have to put that back. Goodness. Yeah, I'm gonna struggle to sneak that out in my pocket, I think. What else can we dig out down here? Oh yeah, this is fantastic. For the really serious Ford model collecting enthusiast, don't just collect the cars, collect the Ford blast furnace so you can smelt your own miniature steel as well. That's tremendous. Any Hot Wheels experts you might be watching, can you tell me what this is worth? Original Hot Wheels sort of motor show display. That looks like it was a Christmas must-have once upon a time. Oh, they've got just about everything here. They've got Fast and Furious memorabilia there, and this is lovely. Recreate Gymkhana in miniature with a very nice tribute to the late great Ken Block. That's fantastic. You have a good playtime in here. Right, what's next? You're starting to get a sense of how wild this place is now? Next, have a look down here where you'll find an entire art gallery. Sorry, I know it's a bit dark down here because the lights are broken in this part of the building, but what you can see here is artwork that's been saved from 4 buildings across the United States that were being torn down, renovated, redecorated. All of this was going to have ended up in landfill. No one wanted it, but it's been saved by the archivists, and it just paints this fascinating social history of Ford. There you go, you got a press shot from Moscow. Don't know if you'd be able to do that these days. Buy your wife a Ford 1943 new models, including tanks and the Liberator aircraft, and basically a blueprint for a Model T chassis. I mean, this is one aisle, there's about 3 more that way and 10 more over there. You could fill the Louvre with stuff in here. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the Ford Motor Company archives. But right next door is the Henry Ford Museum, stuffed with all kinds of exhibits of American life. But obviously, I wanted to show you the cars. Okay then, Henry Ford Museum and the boss, Matt, the curator. Thanks very much for having me.
Glad to have you.
Here are some proper pieces of automotive history. Shall we just take a wander down here and you can tell me some mind-blowing facts about them?
Sure. So this is a 1972 Lincoln Continental stretch limousine that was used in the White House, built for President Richard Nixon, used by every president up through the first George Bush.
Yeah.
Most famously thought of in connection with Ronald Reagan. He was shot in March of 1981. This is the car he was getting into at the time of that assassination.
Wow.
Of course, he survived, but still an important connection to that story.
Sure. Now, obviously, there's a more infamous car behind it, which we'll come to in a moment. But so what are like the innovations? What have they learned at this point, the Secret Service, when they're thinking, we've got to keep the president safe? What have they changed here?
Yeah, this is the first car built entirely from the ground up as an armored limousine. Other cars had been modified from stock Lincolns. This one, no, straight from the beginning, it had the armor plating. And the glass is several layers thick, bullet resistant. You'll notice there are some plugins on the front for speakers and microphones, headsets for Secret Service agents.
Yeah.
Maybe my favorite modification here is on the back. You see the bumper drops down and this little handrail raises up so you have a platform for Secret Service agents to ride in the back of the car.
Oh, so this is a handrail. I thought this was like a bulletproof shield, like the James Bond cars from back in the day.
Yes, no, the little platform for the Secret Service agents, and that this car would have been used anytime the president was involved in a public parade. And these cars are always a challenge because 1, you want the president to be visible to crowds, but 2, you need him to be secure as well.
Well, quite, especially after what happened in Dealey Plaza, wasn't it? In
Yes.
1963?
Yes.
This is quite an incredible car. I can't believe this is actually on public display, but here it is. This is the Kennedy assassination limousine.
This is the car in which President Kennedy was riding when he was shot in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And this car is the turning point for obvious reasons. It was built just as a stock Lincoln in 1961. They did stretch it and made a few other just kind of comfort modifications, convenience modifications, but no armor on the car whatsoever at that time in Dallas. And of course, all of that changed after President Kennedy was killed. And they rebuilt the car basically from the frame up with titanium plating, steel, multi-layered glass, permanent roof, obviously the biggest, most obvious change.
I was going to ask, I think people might find it strange that after a president had been assassinated in a car, the car wasn't retired, it wasn't crushed, destroyed, they added a hardtop and put it back into service.
It really is hard to believe, and it was just a simple matter of time and money. The president needed a limousine, President Johnson at that point, and they just didn't have time or budget to start from scratch, so they decided they would rebuild this existing car, and they finished the whole thing in less than half a year and got it back into service, so really pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. What an incredible piece of American and world history. Right there, one of like the darkest days of the 1960s, but fascinating as an exhibit.
Absolutely.
Right, let's carry on. All right, let's look at some old timers then. You said this is a bit of a highlight?
This is undoubtedly one of the most important cars in the whole museum. This is Henry Ford's quadricycle, the very first car that he ever built, finished in 1896.
So this is the genesis of the American automobile, I guess you'd say, because, I mean, people would associate the Model T Ford, but that was like a Concorde compared to this. This is like as primitive as it gets from Ford.
Pretty basic, but yeah, this is the very heart, the beginnings of Ford Motor Company, and for that matter, the Henry Ford Museum where we are today.
Right.
Little two-cylinder engine in the back, chain drive up to the front. There's a belt with two pulleys, so you have theoretically two speeds, but not very fast. You'd go about 15 miles an hour at most on this, and that's good because there's absolutely no brake on it whatsoever.
Nice. So is that a big flywheel under the seat there to kind of
exactly
smooth it out a bit?
Yep.
And then, hang on, this is a rear-engined, air-cooled. This is a Porsche 911.
In a sense, yes. It was initially air-cooled, then Henry had experimented with water cooling. In fact, that was one of the things you could never quite work out on this car. It always overheated. And we have an operating replica that we use in some of our special events. We have the same problem now more than 100 years later.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. I love the steering arrangement as well there. That looks like it'd be pretty haphazard on early roads.
So we've got an electric vehicle up here in front, which is our Columbia Victoria.
Wait, I thought Tesla invented the electric car. What's this?
That's right. Electric cars were very popular.
Yeah.
Even before the gasoline engine took hold, about 1910 or so. Electrics were easy to buy, and charging stations were everywhere in the United States too, or at least in the big cities, which is
the irony.
Another problem. Right. We have a steam car back here, our 1899 Locomobile in the back. So we cover our three technologies right from the start. The curved dash old is right here, which is sort of a proto version of the Model T, a basic affordable car built on an early form of the moving assembly line too, so that's a special vehicle.
So how come something like the Model T took hold and became the most popular automobile in the world, and then that didn't? What was Ford's secret?
Yeah, the Oldsmobile Curved Dash was just a little single-cylinder buggy. You see, not quite enough power, not quite enough room as Americans start to embrace the car more closely. And as we walk up here, we see two early Ford cars. The black one in the back is a Ford Model N, which was in fact the best-selling car in the United States. Four-cylinder engine, shaft drive, fairly modern by the standards of the day, but it wasn't quite what Henry wanted. And what made Henry Ford different from all other automakers at the time is he believed instead of selling very expensive cars and making all the money on the price of the car itself, he should sell an affordable car and then make the money in volume. But he wanted to build not just a cheap car, a high quality affordable automobile, and that's what set the Model T apart. Before the T, you could get a good car, you could get a cheap car, you couldn't get a good cheap car, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of his quotes around on advertising material saying the transaction does not end when the customer buys the car, it begins, and that's when we must look after him.
That's right. And this is a 1909 model year, the first model year for the T. And people are always surprised that it's red. Well, colors were available for the first couple of years.
Shall we? Yeah, let's just get this on the record. I've never almost heard a definitive answer. The any color you like, as long as it's black. Where did that come from and how true is it?
That has been attributed to Henry Ford. We haven't seen proof yet in writing or anywhere that he actually said those words, but it's in keeping with his general philosophy.
Right.
And yes, Ford switched to all black about 1914, and then only black was available up until 1926. Black paint was cheap, it was durable, and it was much easier just to paint every car the same color rather than to worry about different colors.
Right, what are we looking at here? I can see a Willys Jeep in the distance.
Yes.
What about this?
This is our Essex coach from 1924. Essex was kind of a co-brand of Hudson. This was the first popularly priced closed car in the United States. So, before that, people were driving touring cars like the Chrysler or the Model T back there.
Yeah.
With, no windows, just side curtains. But as the roads got better, people started driving in bad weather, and in winter they wanted closed comfort. So closed bodies became very popular in the 1920s. And
there we go.
Really have stayed so since.
I was about to say that's a piece of history, but it's like we're in a museum. Of course it is.
They're all pieces of history.
The car that won the war?
Yes, this is you're right, it is a Willys Jeep, even though Willys and Ford were both making them during World War II. You would think we would have a Ford Jeep, but no, it's a Willys made down in Toledo, not too far from where we are right now. And yeah, the sort of grandfather of all sport utility vehicles, and very much so a symbol of the arsenal of democracy, Detroit's role in World War II.
Yeah, and of course inspired the Land Rover, which has gone on to become a sort of its own icon on our side of the Atlantic. This reminds me of a character out of Cars.
Yes.
So what are we looking at here? 1949 Ford sedan.
Yes, 49 Ford. This was Ford's first post-war all-new automobile. Right after the war ended.
Wow, it took until 49.
It did.
4
yes.
years after
yes.
the war's ended, and that's when you get a first all-new car.
Exactly right, and this was the first from the big three. Studebaker had introduced an all-new car, I think, the year before, but 49 Ford, and very different from what came before. You notice it's got the envelope body without the fenders, the separate kind of pontoon fenders on the wheels here, so much smoother, much more streamlined in its appearance.
Lovely. And then behind that, I mean, we should reference that, the first kind of non-American car we've looked at.
Yes, we don't have a
also
whole
the most
lot
common
of imports, but the Volkswagen certainly, because it sold very well in the United States, sold very well everywhere, but it's also kind of a spiritual successor to the Model T, just basic, honest transportation. So.
Absolutely. It's the Porsche 911's granddad.
There you go.
Right, let's carry on into the future. Okay, Matt, now I know we're mainly looking at Fords today, so this has really caught my eye. This doesn't scream Mustang, and yet this is like the beginning of Mustang, right?
In a sense, yeah. This is the 1962 Mustang I concept car, and this was built at a time when Ford was looking to kind of rejuvenate its image, look a little younger, a little faster. So they wanted to build a quick concept car, and it's amazing, but this car really, it doesn't have a direct connection to the production Mustang we think about, which came out in 1964. Which is the two projects were kind of growing up side by side and coincidentally used the same name, but it has since been kind of adopted as the father or grandfather of the modern Mustang.
Because it's funny, because to me it looks like it's mid-engined, is it?
It is, yes.
Intakes in the side, and then that's the engine behind the compartment. So it's almost like they were thinking, we need a rival to the Corvette, and the Europeans are going mid-engine with their sports cars, let's do that. And then they just decided, let's do a pony car instead.
Very much so. In a strange way, this car almost has more in common with like the GT40, which came a couple years later than it does with the production Mustang. But it's a little V4 engine in the back that was built by Ford's German subsidiary at the time.
Yeah.
So.
That's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's got a sort of like a Lotus-like daintiness to it, and then the buggy front headlights remind me of like an Austin Healey Frog Eye Sprite.
Yes.
But this is in a way the original Mustang, and yet you'd never think it. That's a fascinating exhibit.
It's curious. You have to wonder what would have happened had Ford put this into production, how well it would have sold.
Yeah. Wow. Right, let's carry on. So that was kind of the original Mustang. This is the original Mustang.
This is it, serial number 1, the very first 1965 or 64 and a half as the collectors called them, Ford Mustang. And,
wow, that is unbelievable. So was this always destined to go straight to a museum, or it's got a license plate on it from Labrador, Newfoundland.
Yes.
Was it owned by someone?
It's a great story. This car should not have ever been sold. It was sent to a showroom in St. John's, Newfoundland, and people would go in there, they would see the show car, but then they would order the real car, which would be shipped later. But there was a pilot by the name of Stanley Tucker who walked into the showroom, and he somehow convinced the dealer to sell the car to him. So he owned it for
I want a white cabriolet with a black interior, and they just went, we have one of those.
He bought it, he owned it for about a year and a half, put about 10,000 miles on the odometer, and you know, when the car became such a hit, Ford tracked it down, and they had to negotiate with this guy to get it back. But they worked out a deal. They flew him down to Dearborn. He got to meet all the executives, you know, kind of wine and dine him. And in exchange, they traded him the 1 millionth Mustang for this one. So,
wow.
Yeah, I think he later regretted that trade. But
well, I was going to say, he's probably owned two of the most valuable Mustangs in history if you had the first and the millionth.
Absolutely.
It's kind of nice that it's such a subtle spec, you know, white on the white wall tyres. It's a really beautiful car. I mean, I'm sorry to ask the vulgar question, but do you have any idea what it would be valued at or what it had to be insured for?
Yeah, I have no idea what this might sell for if it went across the block. I mean, any of the early Mustangs, particularly the V8s, are popular collector cars today because they're just so cool and timeless. But how do you put a price on serial number one? I mean, it's impossible to know.
Yeah, I bet there's probably not that many cars as well where serial number one still exists, because like with the early Ferraris and things, they tended to be taken back to the factory and upgraded, or they get crash tested or something. So to have the first Mustang, I can't believe it's here. That's absolutely mind-blowing. Right, let's go over here and you can blow my mind all over again. Right, Matt said the next best thing is to look at motorsport history. This is quite important, isn't it?
This is very important. This is, in a sense, the car that kind of saved Henry Ford's career. A lot of people don't realize he failed 2 times with car companies before he founded Ford Motor Company in 1903. So,
right, I didn't know that.
he had a lot to lose. In between the first and second failure, he went racing, built this race car, and competed in a 10-mile event with Alexander Winton. And at that time, Winton had his own car company. He had a reputation as a racing driver. Ford was unknown. Even in Detroit, nobody really knew who he was. So you had a David and Goliath type story, but true to form, Henry pulled out the victory, won the race, and got some new investors interested, and went on ultimately to found Ford Motor Company.
So forgive me, Henry Ford was driving?
Henry Ford was driving, yes.
So he was a handy guy behind the wheel. He wasn't just a business magnate, he was also pretty quick.
Yeah, this was the one and only race that he ever competed in on a track personally, so it makes it kind of special. But believe it or not, this car was clocked at 72 miles an hour in 1901, so fast.
On leaf springs and tyres that look like, you know, the sort of thing you'd throw into a lake if someone was drowning. It doesn't really let you want to corner hard on those. And on dirt roads as well.
Yeah. And he had his co-pilot, Spider Huff was his name, Ed Spider, they called him his nickname. He rode on the side of the running board just like that to help balance the car out on the corner. So as crazy as Henry was, Spider was even crazier to do this.
Yeah, they really don't make him like they used to, do they? Right, that's whetted my appetite for some race cars, as you call them. Let's go and see some more.
Lots more.
All right, we've barely moved another step and we've already got another legendary Ford.
This is a big deal. This is the car that won the 24 Hour of Le Mans in 1967 with Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt racing under Carroll Shelby. And of course, Ford won in 1966 with that famous 1-2-3 podium sweep. But what makes this special, this car was built here in the U.S., Gurney from California, Foyt from Texas. So you had an all-American victory at Le Mans, something very special.
Yeah, you're taking the British angle out of our glorious help with Le Mans. But so this is a Mark IV. So this is like with the current Ford GT, and Ford are ending it with the Mark IV, the kind of most extreme version. Here we've got totally new aerodynamics, and by now they've got a more reliable car as well.
Yes, the car's starting to get more reliable, and you're right, they called it a Mark IV because it was just so different from the previous GT40. It's really kind of a separate car unto itself. A lot of people noticed the little bump on the roof there. Dan Gurney was well over 6 feet tall, so they had to put the bump so he could fit in the car. Yeah.
That's a beautiful object.
The GT40's Le Mans legend is something Ford's cleverly riffed off a couple of times in the 21st century, with the supercharged V8 GT and the latest turbo V6 supercar. So naturally, the museum likes to tell its story too.
Okay, now Matt, just over the road in the archive, we've seen a very early polystyrene model of what the Ford GT might have looked like when it was being styled in secret. You've got like the finished clay model here of when they signed it off?
Yeah, full-size clay model that was used to help design the final look of the GT. Yep.
Now that is beautiful, but it's not the coolest half and half Ford GT in this room. What is going on here?
Yeah, this is a hybrid car. It is 1/2 street version of the GT, 1/2 racing version. So
is this a model, or could this actually be driven?
It's just for show. I don't think it would drive very well if it was operable.
Yeah, I feel like maybe on like a anti-clockwise circuit, it would have a lot of, maybe good for through left-handers, but not right. I mean, that's fascinating, and I guess it really demonstrates how how can we put this? How close to a race car the street version was?
Yeah, how similar the two are. I mean, they were both basically designed and built simultaneously.
Yeah, it's what annoyed a lot of the competitors, didn't it? Where it was, hang on, we've taken a street car and made it go racing, whereas you've built a purpose-built race car and now you're going to sell it to some millionaires. But I do think it's a very cool exhibit, but also it kind of, well, it leads on to what a successful project this was as a race car.
Yeah.
With this, I mean, there's the trophy, and there is the Le Mans class-winning GT.
This is it, one not just 50 years after Ford's first win in '66, but 50 years to the day. So you couldn't have scripted it any better.
I mean, it's even more Hollywood than Ford v Ferrari. There's a great big hole punched in the carbon fibre. It's utterly filthy. So is this the actual car kind of exactly as it finished Le Mans?
Yeah, this is a big shift in philosophy. 50, 60 years ago, Ford probably would have just cleaned this car up, made it look brand new, but now they want to keep all that damage, keep all that dirt, because it adds to the authenticity.
Yeah, it's a complete piece of motorsport history, and I think it's much cooler. You can see how the aerodynamics work with the dirt. It all tells a story. Yeah, it's state of the art. It's a lovely way to kind of wrap up, I think, our tour through American car history, but particularly on Ford. It's been lovely to meet you, Matt. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Oh, and one last thing I wanted to share with you. It's not a fast car, and it's not a Ford, but it is very special.
Now, there's so many fascinating exhibits in this place, and we've looked at loads of race cars and fast cars and cool cars, but there's also just really serious parts of America's national history as well. This is the Rosa Parks bus from 1955, where an African-American woman refused to give up her seat and move to the coloured section of the bus for a white passenger. It started the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama. It was one of the flashpoints of the early stages of the civil rights movement. I mean, this is just a bus, but it's also an incredible part of America's racial and social history. Now, I'm kind of amazed this isn't locked off behind a rope, but it's not, so we can actually get on. Now, obviously, that right there is where the driver would have turned around and told Rosa Parks, who was sat back here on kind of the second row back, to get up and move, because the white person section, which is on those sideways seats where you're standing, that was full, and she was told to move to the coloured section at the back of the bus. But she said no, and she was arrested. Now, she was not the first person to have done this. Other African Americans had refused to give up their seats on public transportation. The difference was this time that a young minister called Martin Luther King Jr. heard about the case and decided that was the point to say, boycott the buses. We're not going to stand for this anymore. That led to a year-long boycott of these buses in Montgomery, Alabama, and national and international press. And it all happened right there from this seat. It's just yet another vehicle, which on its own, it's just metal and vinyl and rubber, and yet it's a piece of American history. I think it's absolutely fascinating. This is one of the things I love about museum conservation, is the dedication you have to go to get something like this looking tip-top. Here is what the Rosa Parks bus looked like when it first arrived at the Henry Ford Museum. It had been bought by a guy in 1972 to use as a shed on his land, so he ripped out the interior and left it to rust for, well, decades. There you go, there's the interior, all ripped out, emptied, and now it's fit for a president because it's had this magnificent restoration, and there is Barack Obama sat inside this very bus. So there you go, what a story for a bus that isn't special in of itself, and yet now is an icon.
That's all in just one corner of the massive Henry Ford Museum, so I'd say if you're in Dearborn and have an afternoon to kill, it's worth any petrolhead's time having a look around.